and this is now looking at how we identify our targets and how we influence them. So what I'd like to do in terms of format is start with a bit of overview, some reflections from my own experience, but I'm very keen that others come in with their own examples as well, and I may call on some of you for your examples too to help explore some of these issues. In terms of my expertise, I've actually spent, I guess, over half of my career on the other side of the table, working within government and working alongside some of the people we would consider our advocacy targets. So it's interesting to reflect on what we would need to do as an organisation, how we might work to influence others from that perspective. And so I did just want to start with a couple of thoughts on this. How can we get those we want to influence, but also those who are influencing them as they sip their coffee of a morning to think, you know, are our issues in the briefing that they're going to give? Is this an issue that's gaining attention at the moment? Is this something that decision makers either need to respond to or feel is part of their agenda? And a couple of points of learning to start with. From my experience have been, firstly, it's critical that we're trusted and credible and influential, and I think that's one of our great strengths as an organisation. We have this programme base, we have, in some cases, some very strong research. We have, and most importantly, the voices of children that back our advocacy. So I think we can be credible. And I think we can, and there are many examples of where we are trusted. So this is the question then of how we become influential. And the second reflection is one about how we put our issue at the centre of the debate. Some campaigns I've worked on, for example, around the UNCRC reservation in the UK on detention of asylum-seeking children, was a 14-year campaign. It took a long time to bring that from a broad issue that people want to speak about to something that really drove the decision maker to make change. So we must remember that this is often a long trajectory, and many of our staff around the world have been working on particular areas for decades, even more. So the national and the regional change needs to be driven by the trajectory of the organisation that we're trying to influence. Hello. And then just another reflection I had was, as I was thinking about this, was actually how we give people opportunities to engage. And we don't often think about this, actually. Advocacy isn't a broadcast. It isn't a one-way conversation. It's actually, we need to give people an opportunity to put their issues alongside ours. We need to give them something to do. And a lot of our campaigning, and this is often where I see the link in campaigning, is about giving those targets an opportunity to engage with what we're doing. Sometimes we'll organise a side event. Sometimes it will be more of a campaign activity, giving a speech on our behalf. So it's not always a broadcast, it's a dialogue. And then just one last reflection, and this leads to some of our future modules, is about how we win the argument with the public or with other influential people around the target that we have. How do we get this to be the issue that everybody's talking about? We'll look at that in some of the future sessions. So then, particularly to look at the module that we have, it runs through a couple of areas. One is around identifying and influencing our advocacy targets, really answering the question, who has the power to make the change happen, and how we use some of the tools to do that. And you'll see in the module power analysis, stakeholder mapping, and specifically identifying and influencing advocacy targets. Secondly, a bit more of the how. How do we categorize these targets? How do we identify them? How might we approach them? And so again, just to offer a few thoughts on this, we often identify the most visible forms of power, but actually it's hidden, sometimes it's less visible. Sometimes our work can be around influencing those who others find influential. And we need to map both who we're talking about, but where their power might lie. Just to pull out a couple of examples, Salek, our campaigner in Mali, has been doing some fantastic work with influencing the First Lady and how she could be potentially powerful. Similarly, when I was in Uganda spring of last year, went to see the Director General of the Ministry of Health, and it was quite clear that they'd been having an ongoing, in-depth and regular conversation with Save the Children's staff there. So again, different types of power and different ways of influencing them. It'd be good to pull out that question of how. And then lastly is about how we get people behind the issue, about making our message the message. Sometimes that's about the things that we do around report launches, for example, creating a debate, creating a forum to get people to try out some new ideas. Sometimes that's about us working in coalitions, and sometimes it's actually about directly recruiting in to the organisation who those credible advocates could be, but all along making sure that we're consulting our critics as well as our allies in this process. So much of our work will be about how we're going to map through those targets, how we're going to look at those, the power that they have, how we can choose our tactics to be able to influence them. So I wanted to just stop there for a first round of kind of thoughts and questions on that. But I'd be really interested where some people can share some of their direct experience of doing advocacy themselves, some of their stories and where they think the impact has been, and maybe some of the challenges as well. So anyone who wants to just offer up an example of their advocacy would be hugely helpful, and maybe Shai, you can help me negotiate through who would be a good person to offer up a first reflection.
Jorge, I wonder if you've got any examples from the Latin America region that you could talk through in terms of identifying advocacy targets.
Well, hello to all of you, and thanks, Steve, for the reflection and for the input of this issue. I think it's very important, this part of the advocacy process where we have to find out not only the targets, but also that actor that could influence them. And I haven't prepared anything to share with you at the moment, but I'm thinking which experience we have many experience here in the region. Maybe one interesting one to share with you is, well, I'm not sure, are you hear me? Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And we understand that the target, if we're thinking in a state, for example, regarding how we were interested to push the ratification of the third protocol of the Child Rights Convention by the states in our region in order to have another possibility to request governments to pay attention of the needs to present different violations that children have at this moment in their life. And in order to support this process, we understand that the childhood authorities in the different countries are the target what we need to influence them in order to push the Ministry of Affairs External in order to ratify this protocol. And it isn't very easy how to impact in them, how to push these targets, these actors. And we understand that we need not only to work in the country level, but also in the regional level, where we have an intergovernmental body named Mercosur, that is a place where all the states from the South America are involved and they work together. And they have a periodical meeting where they work, they analyze the different policies they implement in their countries. And we decided that this meeting where the authorities in childhood and authorities related with human rights participate, it will be a good place where we can make lobby and discuss and push the targets in each country that come from each country. And the way and the actor we were discussing which could be the a main actor that influenced them during that meeting, and we understand that during the past many discussions and reflections took place by the NGOs and different members, and we identified that we couldn't make a change by them, so we decided to support a very interesting processes that child-led organizations have been working in the region, and we asked for the possibility that one delegate from this child organization participate in this meeting, and we asked to the governments to have the authorities to have the possibility that one of these delegates of children could share with them some demands or some reflection they have. After that, it was very interesting how this adolescent that participated in the meeting and shared with all the authorities in childhood and in human rights from the countries of the Mercosur, he shared their priorities, and he emphasized how important it is for children and adolescents that the Child Rights Convention approved the third protocol, and why they identified that, and why they feel sensitive for that. And it was very interesting how this delegate that shared background and the analysis could impact in the authorities, that after that, the Mercosur decided to make a statement. So all the authorities involved in that meeting with the power of the Mercosur decided to make a statement where to ask all the countries members of the Mercosur to begin the process to ratify the Child Rights Convention third protocol. So here we identify not only the duty-bearers, but also the actor that could influence them. We make the conditions, we identify the opportunity, and at the same time to support the possibility that this influencer actor interact with the duty-bearers.
That's a really great example, and I think of actually the process of getting your allies to focus around a priority, as well as starting to reach out to those that you want to influence. And often it's creating that centre ground, using a coalition, and being able to respond to the one thing that I've always found common in all of our advocacy targets, which is that they don't have a lot of time, and they don't necessarily have the space, the time in their day to be able to read long documents or to get in a lot of detail. They'd like to know what a lot of organisations coming together have developed a real consensus around what the thing is they need to do. And a lot of the push around the UNCRC at a very basic level has been ratification. And why is that important? Well, it's because all of then the separate issues around children's rights can be based on that. If we've got that initial agreement to ratify, then those individual campaigns on protection, on education, on child survival can all come from that basis. So that's a wonderful example. I wondered if there are any other examples. Maybe Alice, you could give us an example that you could share as well from your experience of influencing advocacy targets.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of different kind of approaches that you can take. I think probably the most recent one I can think of is in South Africa, where we were working to influence the kind of Ministry of Health, less to really to kind of get them to collaborate with us on a specific event around newborns. And I think what was really important there was to understand what motivates them, the South African government. And we had to make some decisions at that point, because just before the big event, we had released the State of the World's Mothers report using different statistics. And we had to decide whether we wanted to kind of use that in a way that we knew they wouldn't be that happy with, or actually we had to kind of hold our fire on that and wait for the big moment, which was the Partners Forum. So we actually decided at that point to take an approach where being a bit more cautious in our advocacy, to not make a big kind of noise around stabilised mothers, but to wait for the forum. And I think that really helped building that collaborative relationship with them. I think it's also really about offering, I think often in advocacy we kind of think about what's in it for us all the time. We don't necessarily think about what is in it for the people we're trying to influence. Of course, everyone would agree we don't want children to die, but they've got a lot of conflicting priorities that are in front of them. So how do you make sure that our option kind of comes across as the most kind of palatable and attractive? And I think for the government at that point, what they really wanted to do was have a platform to talk about some of the strategies and policies that they've got that have been effective. So giving them space to do that, but at the same time saying, okay, that's really important. Can you also talk about what you're doing for newborns, and have you thought about doing this was really an important example as well. So I think it's kind of building a collaborative relationship often is very important, and I think there we were working very much with a kind of technical lead in the ministry, but knowing that actually he had a lot more influence on the kind of maternal and child health portfolio than perhaps the minister who was obviously responsible for that. And building that relationship with him meant that we then became a kind of trusted partner and the person that they turned to when they wanted advice on other areas. So I think, using a specific event to pursue advocacy objectives can be really useful, but it's really important to use that as a way to build a long-term relationship.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, and there's a neat exercise to be done in terms of building that relationship, which is really understanding what the priorities of the person we're trying to influence are. I'm sure many of you will have seen where we've produced, say, an economic analysis of the benefits for one of the issues, or where we've particularly looked at an opportunity within a regional forum, within a global event, about how we can get this issue on the agenda. And a lot of it is about partly making it easy for people, but most importantly aligning it with their priorities, being able to create the argument of how they can get it done by adopting one of our issues. And then I think there are two ways potentially to do this. We've got the mapping exercise within the module, but also it's quite useful to do a bit of role play to try and put yourself in the shoes of the person that we're trying to influence and come up with some of the arguments and counter-arguments. Of course, trusted relationships take a long time, and even one of the things we've got as a benefit is trust within the brand. So often, as an ambassador for Save the Children, that already opens a lot of doors for us, and we can use that as an opportunity. But every single interaction that we have will build or damage that brand as we go along. So it's really important that we produce constantly high quality advocacy, and that means having solid briefings, that means having the technical knowledge, that means understanding some of the political considerations before we approach that target. And I think also making sure we're having the right conversation in the right sequence. So thanks for that example. One of the things I wanted to just dig into a bit more detail, thanks Ken, is around the question of approaches, which we talk about in this module. Often our work is very cooperative, it's very persuasive, and often we are well placed as the technical lead. Of course, there is a bit of an edge to this, which is where we need to have more of an outsider strategy, and it's something that other organisations do very often. In fact, many organisations almost 80% of the time take an outsider position, but it's something that we less do. And I just wanted to ask Serena if you could add in some thoughts on this one, where actually we need to step outside of the relationship and how we can balance that positive, cooperative relationship with sometimes being an external actor and sometimes feeling it's necessary to step outside, either in conversation with the public, by mobilising the public, or taking a strong stance against an issue. I don't know if you could offer some thoughts on that one, Serena.
Can you hear me all right? That's
yeah, I can hear you fine.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of an insider-outsider strategy if it's done strategically, and all parts of the organisation are on board and know what the tactics are. Because it is kind of like sometimes going to war when you take that strategy. You've got your lobbyists, your advocacy people on the inside track, keeping up those internal meetings with your targets, working in partnership. But then you've always got the kind of leverage of engaging on that outsider strategy, when you can be a bit more proactive about the media work you're doing with your campaigning, when you can engage the public and be strategic with the tone that you're using with the public, depending on how those insider talks are going. And so an example of this strategy, when I saw it working really well, was with Oxfam campaigning on the World Bank last year. So really close relationships internally with lobbying staff from both organisations, working closely on improving things, and then actually those technical staff within the bank asking us to be a bit more aggressive in our tone in order to give them more cover for their internal work to elevate the campaigning issues that we're working on land rights. So those needed moments we were able to ramp up the kind of public noise, the outsider strategy, and do it very strategically. And of course, it's really tense when you're doing this, and it just spawns really good internal relationships as well within your own organisation, because people have different ideas about when the approach is needed. So teamwork's really crucial, but I think you can see results much quicker than if you only had one or the other track. So if you've got them working in partnership, it can be really exciting and really accelerate progress.
Thanks, Serena. And I think that's a question in each of our campaign strategies and in our advocacy work that we need to keep asking. Is this something that needs a real push along at a certain point in time? Is there a window? Is there an opportunity? Are there a set of people starting to champion the issue? Or in fact, is there something really urgent and really challenging, maybe something that's a huge barrier that could be removed by a few simple steps? And if we're not getting that traction inside, then there are times that we need to step outside as well. Just to draw one example, I remember when I was working in government on a new bill, an equality bill, and we used to have two meetings. The first meeting would be the stakeholder meeting, and I'm sure many of us have been to those, 30, 40 people around the table, and they're really important for civil servants, for political actors to be able to get a whole range of views. But then we'd have a smaller meeting, just 2 or 3 people, who we would have often with the minister directly. And that was very important to a different perspective, to really bring much closer those people who either were the very trusted, credible technical experts, or the ones who'd been pushing most strongly from the outside and causing a bit of a noise around the issue. And done in the right way and deployed effectively, that can be the kind of thing that can bring you into the room. Now, of course, there's risks to all of this work, and one of the other sessions on planning the campaign strategy looks at risks and how we account for those. But it's important to remember that we have all those tactics in our toolkit. The last area that I just wanted to focus on, and thanks to all those who've contributed so far, is around who should be advocating. And I think this is a really important point for us as an organisation with a child's rights basis. We should, as far as possible, be working with as well as for children in the work that we do. So something that really gives us an opportunity to put children as advocates is hugely important. And also, just to draw another example of some of our work, certainly around the Everyone campaign, but definitely within our child rights governance work and other areas such as education, we've often been working through and with local civil society organisations such as the Amhara Women's Association in Ethiopia, and through and with local leaders in Afghanistan. So places where actually we're not the right people to be doing the advocacy, but rather where we're working with and through others to support them to do this advocacy. And I think that's really critical on some of those very localised issues as well as the national issues. It's really important that we're working alongside communities, alongside people, alongside mothers and children who are directly affected by the issues, and allow them firstly to speak in their own words, but to be able to support them to get into the kind of discussions that they otherwise might not be able to. So some of our most effective work in Afghanistan has been with local leaders, and that's helped engage the community, but also local officials. Of course, every year we run our Race for Survival as part of the global campaign, and that's about children putting their own issues across. And I think as well, when we use some of the more unexpected speakers as well. We did a great letter within the UK press recently around the case for aid, and that was backed by business leaders, by economists, the people who you would naturally assume might be opponents. So again, a good use of working through and with others to be able to deliver change is a hugely important part of what we do. We shouldn't always assume that we're the best advocates, and we can actually work with others to do this. Just wanted to have another check whether there were any other examples people wanted to offer up of their work and how we might be able to use that more broadly. So we've got Egan on the call. Is there anything you'd like to add to this? Particularly thinking maybe about the media and communications, and that's the role of ambassadors or others.
Well, in fact, Steve, if I can speak a bit, in our region at this moment, in fact, we are living. We have some concern that maybe you have some experience to share with us, and how to face it. At this moment, we are working on different issues, but how important is the media, as you said, to influence not only the duty bearers, but also the civil society in general? And we understand that the media put the issue on their public agenda and helps us to push the government to make an answer, and that push the duty bearers to change some situation. But at the moment, we feel that the media is not necessarily working in favor of the campaign we support, or the views of the children and adolescents on the children's rights, are exactly working in the opposite of that with another interest, and it's a big concern how can we join them in favor of children's rights or supporting the quality of life for children. And this is a big problem because they would like to share very problematic image about the situation that children and adolescents are living that are against the right of them to be shown, and at the same time, and they are pushing for some economic interests that they say they will show and they will work in favor of that issue that gave money, or they pay attention to society in favor of the media and not necessarily in favor of the child and adolescent and the situation they are living. Yeah. So maybe you have some reflection about that?
Yes, and a really important point and a really important challenge as well. And I think it's worth remembering a few things. Firstly, we're not the only actor. It's often the case that there are others who are trying to influence the same targets as we are, and the media is just one of those. There are many other organisations with competing issues. There are professional lobbying firms, and we have to be aware that we're only one part of the marketplace. And of course, whilst our advocacy can be very persuasive, often up against large advertising budgets or influential actors, we can be just one voice of the many. So firstly, how do we make our issues important to the media? And I think part of that is about speaking to journalists themselves. We're fortunate having many good journalists working within the organisation, both within our media teams and more broadly. How we package that, again, is something that we explore in the other modules and definitely worth looking at. But being able to present a story to a journalist isn't necessarily the same way that we'd present it to a First Lady or potentially a Director General of the Department of Health. I think there's a couple of ways in which we can do this. Firstly, it's once again that opportunity to engage. So we've used opinion editorials, we've used sign-on letters, we can often influence content of articles that are being put together, but equally, as one of our former heads of media once said to me, when we mobilise, it's actually about who we get along to the mobilisation. How we make a story around that is what will drive the media. A lot of these events, a lot of these tactics are actually about engaging the media's interest in the story. Then I guess the question is how we get that cut through. And I think there's a good example. Sophia's just added a point on the instant messaging about how India's used the media during their presidential elections to draw public attention to child survival. And they did that through a huge amount of social media films, through blogs, through opinion pieces, but also being able to work with journalists to tell the story. I think the second thing is, again, back to that trip I took in Uganda, a very good campaigner we had there actually convened a meeting of the New Vision, one of the major newspapers in Uganda, their editorial board, and a particular journalist who'd taken an interest in our issues, to be able to have a wider debate. It was an opportunity to just behind the day-to-day of running a newspaper, where they could really feel free to dig into an issue in the comfort of their offices. And so that can be very helpful as well. I think, lastly, a lot of journalists are themselves activists. They are campaigners. They're people we can really engage. And we see some very good examples certainly in Nigeria and Kenya, of where we've done media roundtables, where we've engaged those who do know about our issues to be most effectively able to engage with them. And help them feed the stories, but also get the stories from them and be able to amplify their voice. And I think just lastly, one point is, I guess, around the lack of understanding of the issues, and that we mustn't ever assume that it's known. At a meeting we held last year in Kenya, we invited along an arts activist, a social documentary photographer, one of the campaigners from Amnesty International, and the news anchor who chaired on Kenyan TV one of the social media shows. And what was fascinating was that actually none of them knew anything about the statistics of child survival in Kenya, and as soon as they did know, they were immediately willing to make a story around this. So I think it's again about taking people from the basics every time, making it as easy as possible for them, and drawing on the extraordinary examples of where we've used events, where we've used new data, where we've created the story for journalists and tap into their often campaigning instincts themselves. We are just one voice trying to get their attention, and so the more we can give them, the easier we can make it, the more effective it's likely to be. Thanks very much for that. I think we're drawing to the end of the 45 minutes you gave me, Shani, is that all right?
Yeah. So any last thoughts? Any other questions from everybody? I've just let you know that session 8 of the online training is specifically focused on engaging the media, and should also help develop any should help answer any questions you have around that. Session 7 is communicating your message, and that's really important, recognizing your different targets and what motivates them, and the need to develop a message that compels each of them based on their specific interests to move something forward. As my example I always give is the way you message something to the Minister of Health is very different to the way you would message it to the Minister of Finance. The one is looking very specifically at service delivery of health services. The other is looking at the economic argument of investment. And so, just recognizing those nuances. The community leader is looking at a different message to the UN General Assembly representative. So just keep that in mind as you develop it.